Good evening. This is Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board, and also Chair of the Select Board's Committee on Policing Reform. This is our meeting of, December 16, 2020. We have a quorum, and I'd like to start off by approving the minutes of the previous meeting of December 2nd, 2020. Any comments, edits to those minutes?
Marty did share edits with me in advance.
Yeah, I saw that. I wasn't able to read them though, but let's approve them subject to, or approve them as amended. All in favor, just raise your hand. Okay, let's see. Yep, looks like everyone's raising their hand. Okay, minutes are approved. Okay. Tonight, we're having a pre-meeting educational presentation in the form of a citizen's complaint. Now, before we start, I'd like to just get a clear understanding of why we're listening to citizen complaints in this committee. This is not a complaint committee, but the complaints of citizens filed with the police department can be helpful in helping us identify weaknesses in our complaint process and reforms that we can make in both the complaint process as well as other aspects of policing here in Brookline. Any other thoughts on why we would listen to a complaint? No? Come on.
I mean, maybe John would want to provide some further updates, but I think it can be useful illustrating well, for reasons that you described, potentially, how, from the perspective of civilians, what the complaints process is like to them, and the extent to which they perceive it to be, like how they were treated, and whether they perceive that it handled their process, the process treated them fairly, and also the ways in which, you know, processes on paper have to be translated into processes in practice, and it's hard to know exactly what the process in practice, to get a full picture of that. And one way to get a full picture of that is from listening to folks who went through it. So that's my gist.
Yeah, no, and I would add that we get a sense of, you know, how people perceived, how they felt about the process. And that's, you know, an intangible that's still very important in terms of coming up with proposed reforms to you know, various aspects of policing. So with that, any other comments? Jonathan, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's imperative that we hear from people who have had these experiences, you know, similar to the work we're doing here in a larger committee. So you know, just pretty much echoing what seems to be true across the board. Listening from people will help us understand the direction we're going and sort of what we can put in place.
Yeah,
will help the process.
I guess the other thing I would add is that by listening to the complainant and reading the report filed by the police department, we can begin to see some of the nuances and ambiguities in people's perception of what's going on during an incident. You know, it's not always the case that, you know, what's on paper is clearly stating, you know, what really happened and the feelings that people have during that interaction. You know, we ask that complaints be vetted by the subcommittee on accountability. And, you know, the reason for that is to make sure that, you know, we really understand, you know, what the complaint is and how, and in fact, how credible it is before we bring it before the whole committee. And at the subcommittee level, we may learn some stuff that's useful in terms of you know, making changes or recommendations for reforms, but not necessarily, in some cases, you know, something that really is justified to bring before the full committee. So, at any rate, with that,
Marty wants to say something.
I'm sorry, Ron.
Yeah, Marty, I thought Marty raised his hand. Is that correct?
Okay.
Yeah, both electronically and my finger,
Okay.
the old-fashioned way. I just want to take issue with one word that you just said, Bernard.
One word?
Yes, one word. One
Okay.
word, credibility. There's no way in hell, if you pardon the expression, that our subcommittee or even the full committee can try to make these credibility determinations in individual cases. We could spend our whole time doing that. What are we supposed to do? Have hearings and hear from both sides and hear witnesses and have cross-examination? I mean, that, I hope you didn't mean that. I do
No,
think.
I did not mean that.
Right. So the point is, you can't determine credibility without doing that kind of a thing. That's what Lieutenant Campbell does.
Yeah.
And I do believe that we can come up with a process to improve the credibility of credibility findings. And I've been working on that already, and Michael has.
Okay.
And I think that's our task, is to make the credibility findings more credible in the future.
Right. Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry. I think we're doing a complete disservice to the public if somebody comes forward and they're saying that I've been hurt in this way. And we think that our task is to go find the credibility of their story. That's abysmal. Abysmal.
I'm not proposing that. In fact, I'm proposing.
Yeah, I'm just saying overall.
He's criticizing me.
If we think, you know, we have to go, you know, find the credibility of people's stories, then I think that we're doing the wrong thing by gathering here.
Okay, let's listen to this. What I meant by that is not a full credibility determination, but the subcommittee can determine, you know, which complaints they feel comfortable bringing to the full committee, and that raises the issue of credibility, which is a very subjective thing, but it has to do with, you know, the comfort level that the subcommittee has in presenting a particular complainant to the full committee. So, I mean, no, we're not going to do a you know, hearing on credibility. I meant that a little more loosely than that. So, but at any rate, let's move on unless anyone else has any other thoughts.
I just wanted to say that I'm glad that we've got a diversity of opinion on the subcommittee, so that there need not be issues with. It helps to balance internal biases that individual members of the subcommittee have. So I think that's and I think that's important.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important. We don't want to be, you know, all saying the same thing and believing the same thing, because we can't catch our errors when that's the case. So contrasting viewpoints is important. So do we have the complainant available, Devin?
Bernard, may I ask, I had trouble logging in as usual. Did you do minutes, and did you and Devin get, I had one sentence to add?
Yes, we did minutes, and we accepted your one sentence. Okay, Jonathan,
I don't see the complaint.
Have you arranged for the person to attend?
Yeah, Jiho, I don't know how to, I'm not in charge of this.
I don't see her.
I invited her, she said she was gonna be here, but I don't know.
It doesn't look like she's in the attendee list yet. Jonathan, if you have her email address, I can send her a calendar invite quickly.
Yeah, I sent her the link, but hold on. And she said she was gonna be here, but maybe something came up, I don't know. Here we go. Okay, I'm sending that to you, right?
Okay, why don't we move on to the next item, and when she comes in, we can get back to her. Next item was discussion of the policing reform bill that came out of the conference committee and the governor's objections to a couple or a few provisions in that. You know, I'm not, you know, going to give my interpretation of the bill, but I do want to just highlight a few things First of all, and I'm going to go by, chronologically by section. Section 1 establishes 4 committees or 4 commissions. And I just want to mention one thing that I found to be very interesting. I'm sure it's an oversight, but a committee of African American members designed to be to include people with demonstrated commitment to the African American community. Same thing with Latino or Latinas commission. But with respect to persons with disabilities, a commission to address concerns of persons with disabilities, the members have to be include persons of different sexual orientation and gender identity. The Commission on Black Men and Boys, however, requires that members include individuals of varying sexual orientation, but not gender identity. In my opinion, that's a huge mistake, because the situation and a risk that transgender Black individuals face is incredibly important to be addressed by a commission like this. So I intend to just communicate that to maybe Senator Brownsberger, because I think that's a major omission. That's my opinion. People may disagree. The other sections address or set up a new police officer standards and training commission, which goes into great details in terms of training, setting standards, and certifying and decertifying police officers. I think that the accountability subcommittee of this committee and the personnel and structure and mission subcommittee should look at those provisions and see how it impacts our recommendations and how Brookline sort of compares to some of the things that are proposed in these provisions. That's under Section 30 of or primarily under Section 30 of the bill. So you may want to go there. There's also Section 37, police accountability and qualified immunity. I know the accountability subcommittee is looking at the issues related to this because it establishes a right to bias-free professional policing. I think the civil rights, militarization, and mass events subcommittee should also look at that. And under that provision, it establishes a conduct of an aggrieved person. Excuse me, not only my eyes, but my mouth. Conduct against an aggrieved person resulting in decertification of a police officer is prima facie evidence of a violation of the Mass Civil Rights Act. And qualified immunity is taken away under those circumstances. So that's something that could be very significant, and the accountability subcommittee should make sure that they think that or look at that carefully. There are provisions, Section 40 to 43 and elsewhere in the Act on mental health intervention. And it creates a new Center for Responsive Training and Crisis Intervention, which I think replaces an existing committee or center that deals with crisis intervention. The mental health subcommittee that was recently established should look at that carefully and see if some of the things we're looking at are maybe preempted by this idea, or if it suggests things that we need to look at in addition to what we're looking at currently. A lot of individual sections on police training, the personnel structure and mission subcommittee should look at those because we're going to be suggesting recommendation or suggesting changes to training or ideas with respect to training, and this may be an important way to, or this may be important in terms of that work. Section 67 to 69 is the primary provisions dealing with restrictions on civil service. And again, the personnel subcommittee should look at that because they're dealing with the civil service issue. Section 78, 79, and 120 primarily deal with juvenile justice. The community outreach subcommittee should definitely look at that because it will have a significant impact on school resource officers and how they operate in the community or in schools. There's section 83, racial justice accountability, bans racial or other profiling. Now, this is something that the Civil Rights Subcommittee should look at very carefully. I'm not sure how this is actually, we should look at it in terms of how enforceable this is. It bans racial or other profiling, and it authorizes the Attorney General to bring a civil action for injunctive or other equitable relief to enforce the ban. And it has a, I think, fairly general definition of profiling as differential treatment. And as the subcommittee, Civil Rights Subcommittee is finding, that's not an easy thing to pin down. Also, the Civil Rights Subcommittee should look at the no-knock warrants in Section 94. I don't think that's a big deal, but we should at least look at it. Let's see, Section 30, which establishes a new Chapter 60, the Police Officer Standards and Training Commission, includes a lot on use of force. So, that's something that I think all the subcommittees should look at because it sort of really is something that is relevant to all of them. So those are my thoughts on the legislation and which subcommittees should be looking at specific sections. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on this. Yes, Marty.
Well, I've taken a little interest in the legislation. As you know, I tried to get you and Raul of the select board to weigh in on it last week when it was on the governor's desk. So I have had some interest in it. I haven't read it that carefully. It's a huge bill, but I guess I'm not convinced that most of the things you mentioned that we have to really factor into our work right now, to be honest. It seems to me that, let's take the standards, whatever they call it, post or something.
Yep.
Assuming they come up with sounds like a lot of consensus to do kind of a statewide standards commission. I don't see how that affects our work. We can do our own thing in Brookline. Same with most of the things you mentioned. And plus, the other thing is none of this is going to be in place for a while. Civil service is mostly a study. I just looked at it because I wasn't aware until a half hour ago that there was anything in there about civil service. It's mostly a study. So I don't know. I guess I'm not convinced that we need to do that much differently than we've been doing.
No, I don't think we should do anything different. It's just that our work should be informed by what's going through the legislature, because that could have a big impact on policing and some of the things we're looking at.
Also, I would expect what goes through the legislature to be, in many ways, some of the standards would be kind of the minimum standards, the floor. And so there are situations where we might want to supplement those, but we certainly should be aware of what is likely to be the floor.
Yeah, I think that's true.
One other thing that's in the legislation that I wanted to flag because it had come up, or the issue had come up in an accountability subcommittee meeting, was its changes to what constitutes, what is public record in the context of
Hmm.
disciplinary matters for law enforcement personnel. So whereas previously, I think records related to an investigation of a law enforcement member were exempt from the public records law, this legislation gets rid of that exemption in the context of police who face discipline. So those are now no longer exempt from the public records law. This came up because I think Jonathan asked at a subcommittee meeting what had happened or what kind of sanction, for lack of a better word, discipline, I guess is the right word, an officer faced for, for confronting two Black drivers in a car accident that he was involved in off duty.
Right.
We couldn't know because of the public records law, the exemption for disciplinary matters, but apparently that exemption is now no longer exists for police, or assuming this gets
It's limited to.
it's now more limited. Yeah, it's not clear to me like exactly what this means, but like the that exemption for disciplinary matters seems to be reduced by this legislation, and that's something I'm curious to learn more about.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think the provision is only for completed investigations because there's a separate public records exception for things that are under investigation. I don't think they changed that. I'm guessing.
Yeah,
what
the
they-
summary
the-
says those investigations which are completed. There's a
Yeah, I think it's personnel records that they're amending because that personnel records are also an exemption under public records.
Yeah, on
So-
page 135 of the packet, the summary, and it points to the section of the legislation, says, makes clear that records related to a law enforcement investigation, once the investigation is concluded, are not subject to the exemption to the public records law that otherwise exempts personnel records from the public records law.
Right.
And what Michael's referring to is the summary, section by section summary prepared by Senator Brownsberger, who is one of the sponsors of the legislation. And I hope everyone had a chance to look at that because the summary really gives you a lot of information without having to go through the sort of arcane way in which legislation is written in the bill. So, any other thoughts?
Yeah, so just kind of building from that train of thought, is it any different in Brookline? Does anybody, perhaps Dan O'Leary can kind of help us understand what that process looks like in Brookline to obtain records related to law enforcement from closed investigations?
Well, that's subject to state, that's a state statute. So, this would change that state statute to some degree.
Right, obviously, is the time we abide by what's within the state. Yeah, it's interesting, because I obviously we all wish that there was a way that perhaps there could be more sort of transparency, not so that there's like this very sort of like punitive line that we have to hold, but more, we see similar things in healthcare as well. Third leading cause of death in America is healthcare, like malpractice. And, there's no like public record for doctors who have caused harm, or like you can know, and like there's no like flagging, like, of like, okay, well, this person has been involved with X amount of, internal disciplinary actions. Like, how can we, like, make that known, and so that that like, the public is aware, and also, not just so that, okay, well, if a police officer is engaged in infractions in Brookline and is discharged, they can just move on to Medford and easily obtain employment And there's no like flagging system of understanding
So,
their.
so the post commission sets up a procedure whereby you can decertify an officer for misconduct. Of course, that's subject to due process rights that the officer has. But once certified or decertified, that officer can't be employed by any other police department in the Commonwealth. Now there's some national proposed legislation that would make that national policy, but that's going to be slower to implement than the Commonwealth legislation.
So, sorry to take up so much time. I'm just curious, like, what does the certification mean in practice for officers in our department? Are they gonna, presumably they now, because we didn't have a certification procedure previously, so presumably the whole department now has to like get this certification? Is that what happens? Or is it just going forward for new recruits?
Casey, are you raising your hand on that? Oh, I'm sorry. You're just picking up your coffee cup. Yeah, my understanding is that there is some grandfathering in. There is a grandfather clause, section 102. And I assume that someone who has been through a police academy does have
they
grandfather for a short period of time. Pardon me?
So like they would automatically become certified because they've already gone through the training is the idea.
Yeah, but I think they have to go through additional training, but not immediately.
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously figure this out more as the time goes by, but I'm just kind of curious how a case would get to this national or state certification agency, like what the process would even be, like how would it go from local to state, and I mean, we'll see.
The post commission can receive complaints, and they have, as I understand, investigatory powers. So, they would, I guess that's the way it would get there.
But like, would local governments complain to the state, or would civilians directly complain to the state?
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but that's something that we should, I mean, that's an example of how this is actually relevant to the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I've this Michael from the town council's office, but I have looked through maybe I've gotten 3/4 of the way, and that was before I knew that there was a summary. So I was doing my own summary, but just kind of looking through it. And then I sort of stopped too once the governor intervened a bit and sent it back for revisions. But I do think that there's a lot of, because these commissions that are created too are tasked with creating and establishing their own regulations that fall within or under their jurisdiction. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done as to how it's going to work locally and then with the state as well. But I think I may be answering your question, Michael. I can take a look back at my notes, but my recollection is that for the most part, if a civilian complaint came through, it would still be handled, locally, but there would be a requirement that notice be given to the state commission or agency that's now tasked with kind of overseeing investigations. And I think there was a 1-year period in which the investigation would have to be completed, and then the disposition is then issued, but then also the disposition is passed on to the state agency or commission as well. So there's going to be there's going to be kind of like continuous dialogue almost, if you will, between the local, the municipality and the police department, and then also the state. But I think there's a lot that still needs to be worked out, and that will have to be worked out by those individual commissions. And it's not, through regulation, that's not exactly, explained or described in this reform bill.
Yeah.
I think there's still a lot. There's still a lot to be done, I think.
And for example, they set up a bunch of commissions For example, Special Commission on Emergency Hospitalizations, Special Commission to study civil service law, etc. Special Commission for establishing a law enforcement officer cadet program, Commission on Structural Racism in Correctional Facilities, a separate commission on structural racism in the parole process, and a special commission or a separate special commission on structural racism in the Massachusetts probation service. So, they've left a lot to be studied by these special commissions in order to sort of fill in the details of what the ultimate legislation will be, or what the ultimate rules will be. And of course, the Post Commission also includes a bunch of obligation or requirements that they study different aspects of policing. So, I think you're right. What Michael, suggested that this is a work in progress. It's important for us to know where they are, but it's also important to know that this is not the final word on anything. So, what we do, sort of fill in the details pending the completion of their process, is going to be very important.
Yeah, if I may jump in there to just one thing I'd like to add, I think that may be relevant to our work as well. We are getting cameras, police cameras that they're going to have with them, but the use of facial recognition technology has been a highly contested proposition, if it should happen, if it should not, how the sort of footage can be handled. Are police officers able to use footage, surveillance for their, as evidence? And so I believe that those are issues that we can certainly that's very relevant to the conversation we can have here, because that's very much something that's on its way within Brookline.
Yeah, well, we banned facial recognition in Brookline, and as currently written, the state bill does not preempt local jurisdictions from implementing bans. However, that is one of the issues that the governor is objecting to. So who knows how that's going to come out of the negotiation between the legislature and the governor. So I see Michael Kivney is here. Any thoughts that you have that you want to make sure that we don't leave out of the discussion?
Good evening. No, I don't really have much to say in regards to that. Whatever the rules in place, if it's facial recognition, we're allowed, and we would discuss it, but it's been banned, so there's no really point in discussing it.
Okay.
Ask a simple question to Officer Kevney. Is it Kevney or Keaveney?
It's Keaveney.
That's what I thought. I had a Jimmy Keaveney in my high school class.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did I mispronounce your name?
Yeah, I think everybody does, but
I'll
that's
try to remember it. Keaveney.
Keaveney, yep.
Thank
Okay. Any other discussion? So is Ms. Lee available?
No, unfortunately, I have not heard from her. So she's not available at this time.
Okay, I'd like, have we put her complaint letter, the police department's complaint form, and I think those are the two things we have on our webpage?
So I'm sorry, can you restate that question?
Not in the packet. I can put are you talking about the IAO report?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, okay.
I can.
And her letter to the select board, her later.
Yeah, so the appeal letter, that's what you mean.
This is Devin. I may have missed it. I'm not sure if someone emailed it to me to put in the packet.
Yeah, I don't think we emailed it to you. I think it's in the subcommittee's file.
Yeah, then it's not on the website.
Okay, so
Okay.
why don't we?
I'll get that to you, Devin.
Yeah, make that available, and I'd like people to just read it and see what they think about a complaint and the IO, the Internal Affairs Office response to the complaint. And if you have any thoughts, provide them to the subcommittee.
I had a response that I written out in anticipation of Jiho being here. If it is okay with you, Bernard, and everybody, if I may read that. If not, I don't want to take up much time.
No, I mean, I assume it's not really long. So why don't you read it? It's not really long, right?
No, this is not going to be like a 15-minute thing. It's short, just like some thoughts that came to mind.
Yeah.
First, I want to acknowledge every woman on this committee, especially those who have worked hard to attain their PhD. Your doctoral experience is valued, given recent news that we're hearing. So just acknowledgement there. When we started on this committee several months ago, Bernard introduced each person by name and mentioned their background at our first meeting. In that brief introduction, I remember if the chair introduced June Beanie as representing NAMI, working within the police department. Since then, I have come to discover that the department paid June more than $12,000 last year for consulting services, as cited by the town's open checkbook. I'm sure June had great intentions in her desire to do this work. She made it clear that she did not want to be here and that the Reimagine Committee is the place where she truly wanted to be. But my questions, I'm just wondering if, why is it or how we didn't know that she was, kind of representing NAMI within the Brookline Police Department, and, why we didn't know that, because I don't know, when I found out the information, it just seemed to me like as if I was a conflict of interest, sort of, from the beginning. So, when it came to inviting complainants to speak about their experience with the complaints process, Bernard said that he pretty much shut it down to some extent, because he incited that the complainants needed to be vetted. And we sort of talked about that, and vetting essentially, finding out if their story was credible, which I just thought was a little too much, because if somebody's coming forward with their pain, seeing if that's credible is out of reach. But, I just wonder why, if vetting them was a necessity, how if Bernard vetted the fact that there was a NAMI June, sort of partnership.
Okay. Yeah.
So those are a few things that I wanted to share. I just to finish, I'm personally sick and tired of a lot of what I've experienced is, what I describe as charades, because I don't feel that I applied to do this work because it's fun. I don't think any one of us did that. What I'm really saying here is that there's a lot of waste of time that I feel we've wasted on issues, and instead of bringing the police in, bringing in the community and doing the work, and really, we're getting there. I'm not an expert in any of this, and we're all just figuring it out together. But I just feel like the continuous, sort of what I see as blockades to hear from people, from the public, and to understand the process from them, has really been hard to work with. So, a lot of people don't have faith in what they feel may come out of this. I still do, but I'll be honest, I'm really losing that, to be quite honest with you. And so those are just kind of some air of grievances. So I want to thank you for listening to my frustration. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. I'm sorry that was a little longer than anticipated.
No problem. So the only thing I'll respond to is, June. I selected her because of her background. I knew that she worked with NAMI. I assumed that NAMI was involved with the police department. I don't think her being paid by the police department for her work with NAMI is relevant. I didn't vet her to that point, or to knowing that. I didn't vet you or other members of the committee, and therefore, there may be issues that members of this committee have that may have caused me not to select them on this or put them on this committee. But I wanted to have a committee that was as broad as possible, so no one could claim that I was trying to direct the results of the committee in one direction or another. So that's all I have to say. Anyone else have anything to say?
So
Yes.
I do. Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, my point, I'm less pessimistic than some other people on this committee, but that doesn't mean I think it's a done what we do. It's a done deal that what we do will be what we intend to do. I just think we have to work very hard to make sure that any potential obstacles are overcome. And I'm still willing to do that work to make sure potential obstacles are overcome, because I want this to be, I didn't join this just as an exercise in fun either. I joined because I wanted serious things to come out of it. And I'm willing to work for that. I do think a factor is partly because I'm over 70 and I've been in large organizations for most of my working life, is that I may be a little more patient is the right word, but probably my expectation about how quickly things can happen and how quickly we can work through these kinds of things. I think I'm not surprised. Let me put it this way: I'm not surprised that it's taken this long. I'm not at all surprised that it's taking this long, and maybe that's why I'm more willing to slog through. I was expecting it to be a bit of a slog, and it is a bit of a slog, and I'm not surprised, but I am determined to do everything in my power to make sure that what we do is meaningful and trusted, and makes a very positive difference. That's the way I feel about it. So the second thing I'd like to say is, in terms of vetting who is going to be on the this committee or the Reimagining Task Force, I have been convinced that at the very least, Bernard and Raul looked at the candidates together. And I thought there was a statement from the select board that the select board at least felt that the vetting that was done by Bernard and Raul for the two bodies worked out well in terms of at least the diversity and the broad representation of the people on the two on the two bodies. One of the reasons why I think of it in terms of the two bodies is I actually applied for both bodies because I felt I could make a contribution to either one, and apparently June did this. Well, Michelle perhaps only applied to the second one. I'm not sure, if there are concerns about whether the vetting was done thoroughly enough for everyone, I think it is very important to bring that up, as Jonathan has. But I suspect it's a broader issue than just that particular one person. And so that's all I'll say about that right now.
I want to speak to the vetting issue for a moment. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So, Bernard, what would be your concept of vetting? You stated a few moments ago that people on the committee should have been vetted or should be vetted.
Okay, wait, Raj, hold on. I think I was muted when I said what I said. sometimes I use words a little loosely, and I think I used vetting maybe a little loosely. And what I meant was that, you know, I vetted in terms of the paper that was presented to me in terms of resumes and other materials. So I knew, you know, what the contributions of individuals could be. I did not, for example, do a Corey check. I did not, you know, go, you know, deep into.
Bernard.
Huh? So, you know, I did not, you know, go deep into, you know, the work and who pays for that work of individual members of the committee. But, you know, I vetted them in terms of looking at the paperwork that they provided. So, Raj, go ahead.
No, I was going to say to suggest that there should be a Corey vetting of the members of this committee. I mean, that's so far off the charts as far as I can see. These are all fine citizens of Brookline. They're trying to do something good for the community. So I leave it.
I put them on the committees.
I'm sorry?
That's why I put them on the committee. I agree.
Okay. Let's move on.
All right.
Marty.
I just want to pick up on the word vetting, and I join what you said, that I think the word has been used, actually, I'll say in two different ways. What Jonathan is talking about is the vetting of members appointed to the committee. But what I think Bernard was talking about is the vetting of the individual complainants that we hear from. And what I have understood when he has used the word vetting before is, and it's something I agree with, is that when we hear from individual complainants, I believe that we need to be informed of what lessons we learn for actual reforms. And I don't think that we should hear from them merely to make them feel better. And I think it's good for them, for us to hear from them, and I don't mind doing that. But I think the point is that we need to focus on reforms. And I think anyone we hear from, the people who are putting them forward, should tell us what lessons we have as to actual reforms. So I think we are, that's what our committee was formed to do, is to make reforms. And, you know, without specific proposals, that's what I meant, what I thought Bernard meant by vetting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's move on.
I'm sorry.
I mean,
I would like to respond to that. I'm sorry, Bernard, to cut you off.
Very briefly.
Yeah, I just yeah, there's just a lot in that, because
no, there wasn't much in that. I mean, we're using vetting in the context of the subcommittees, and now we're using it in the context of who I selected for the committee. So
I'm sorry. So there's not a lot in that, because I think there was a lot in that based on what I'm thinking. So you don't think there's a lot in that? That's totally fine.
Don't tell me why you think there's a lot.
So I mean, the simple idea of, it's not just about vetting people in this, you know, however your process was, Bernard, I don't know, like, I don't know what your process was, you know, putting people, obviously it makes sense to have diversity in all of that. I'm for it. So we're not talking about that. That's not the conversation here. So what we're talking about is, okay, when you're talking about vetting, but you're talking about it more from the complainants vetting their story into seeing if their story is credible enough to hear. Even the idea of hearing them at all was a big issue. It was a big issue, even just hearing them at all, you know. And then it was like, okay, well, hearing somebody come on to the committee at large and speak on their issue, it is an understanding of what somebody went through in the complaint process related to what we're working on in the subcommittee. That was a big issue. Eventually, we're able to vote to have one person come on, you know, but the whole thing has been like pulling teeth just to get to hear from someone. Whereas from the onset, what we really should have done is put something in place. Obviously, we're not going to be able to go back, hindsight is 2020, but put something in place where we're able to hear from the public. We didn't do that.
Okay, I put in place the
This
guidance.
was our opportunity to do that. With all due respect, Bernard, and if I may finish just my thought, but you know, I don't mean to be heated about it. I'm just, you know, I just wanted to respond about that because it is important to hear from people. And so your vetting process and what you're saying is to hear whether or not what people are saying in their story is credible enough to hear. And that is not okay. That is not okay. We do need to hear from both sides. Hear from, you know, we have Michael here, we have Dan here, you know, we have Casey here. We do need to hear, you know, and we had other people come on. We do need to hear from the public as well, just as equally.
Right.
And
Okay.
that is important based on the work that we're doing.
Right. Okay, Elizabeth, and then we're gonna move on.
I just wanted to say that I did find our public hearing where we did hear from a number of people from the public very, very helpful. And I want to make sure that we include some of those comments, which we heard from a number of people. I can't even remember how many, but it was really a number. And I appreciated it. All those people that took the time to get on and speak. And we heard a whole host of spectrum of perspectives. I just want to make sure that we put some of that information in our final report, because it is, I think, to Jonathan's point about the importance of hearing from the public, it is, and we have heard a lot, and I'm sure we'll hear more as we go, but I want to make sure we do get in the report what we did hear back in September at the public hearing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was the point of the public hearing. And subcommittee should review the report and you know, pull out of it what's relevant to their areas of responsibility. So, or review the hearing transcript and pull out of that what's relevant to their areas of responsibility. Let's move on to the subcommittee reports. Let's start with personnel structure and mission. I think that's Elizabeth.
That's me. So we have a meeting tomorrow. In our last meeting, we did a lot of work discussing the fairness of the exam issue, because one of the questions is, if we were not in civil service, how would we make sure the exam was fair to all and not a discriminatory exam? And so Dan O'Leary had presented us with some of the experiences of other places. We had looked at a vendor and how they have dealt with it. And then there was a recommendation, which we will be doing, which is to review the civil service exam litigation history and whether or not, and what the outcomes of that have been, to modify the exams and make sure that they are fair exams. So we just know that no matter what we do with civil service, if we stay in or stay out, that issue has to be resolved before we do anything. We also, Dan O'Leary is working for us on a summary of what we already do for diversity hiring, and that is in process. And we will be looking at that, summarizing that. We are really appreciative. Michael Keaveney is going to come to our meeting tomorrow and talk to us about union perspectives, issues, join with us on this civil service conversation. One thing we've learned from other communities is that if you can start out with the police being part of the process, it makes a big difference to the success of the effort. And we really appreciate that. Michael, thank you for coming early to our meeting. And then Ann Braga, we also are going to involve in the human resources, and she is on deck to come to our meeting at the end of the month. So we'll have Ann speak to us about the intersection of civil service and human resources at that point. Under our topic of officer health and wellness, we have started documenting what we already do to deal with stress events, impacts on officers, remembering that hurt officers hurt people. And so it's very important to tackle making sure that our officers are getting the support they need to be the best they can. And we have a CIT fact sheet available for the committee, which we are reviewing, done by Jen Pastor and Chris Malin. And we are they are available to us if we need them for questions, but given how tight our time is, we're starting with just the documentation. We also learned about what the police currently do with their relationship with the Boston Police Stress Unit. We had a discussion about what about the EAP as a resource, the reviewing that, and can speak to that too. And then we talked about engaging the local community, our local community, for a more robust chaplaincy counseling program with psychologists and local faith leaders who might be available to help our officers after stress events. We're working on the governance piece as our select board as the police commissioners. And I've started a conversation with Marty on your and the accountability committee, Michael and Marty, about an ombudsman liaison type person to help, and how we would work that into the governance question. So we're trying to do something that doesn't duplicate efforts, just builds on each other there. And our, let's see, that is it for personnel. And then I've got another committee, I'll go that next. Do you want to add something, Bernard and Paul, on our committee? What else would you like to add?
I think that's a good summary. Paul, do you have anything?
It's very good. Thank you.
Okay, and Michael, Downey, or Dan, anything else you want to add?
Okay. Oh, Marty?
Yeah, just two quick
Marty, yeah.
suggestions, and maybe you've already talked about this. The state bill does create a study of civil service, and
yeah,
I'm hoping that we, as a future recommendation, will participate in that study for purposes of whatever we think is helpful for Brookline. My other question that doesn't need to be answered now is, I'm assuming that you will be looking at not just the diversity of the department in general, and I think you mentioned that Chief O'Leary is going to come up with those statistics over time, which I'm sure have changed over time. But the tougher question for me is the promotion issue. Yeah. And we don't need to discuss that now, but I would like to know how civil service impacts the diversity of superior officer promotions.
Yeah. Thanks, Marty. I think that's a very good point. We don't want to lose sight of, and we'll bring that up tomorrow and figure out how to tackle it. That's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, next, accountability subcommittee. That's Michael Zurab.
Yep. So I'll give the report on that. Thanks. We're still meeting Mondays at 5 weekly. We've been doing that for a while. At our meetings, in addition to talking about reforms, we've had 4 complainants come in and speak and kind of give their accounts. And we're hoping that, and we've scheduled to have Lieutenant Paul Campbell, the internal affairs officer for the police department, who oversees discipline and the civilian complaints process, to come in on Monday. As far as other, like at our next meeting, as things that we've been working on, one thing that we've been working on that has sort of seen fruition is adding a web form to the department's website for filing complaints, so that in addition, like previously, although you could file commendations through the website, to file a complaint, you had to print out the form and send it in. And so this is just sort of creating a parallel web process for filing them online. And that's been accomplished, and it's been added to the website. So I want to thank Dan O'Leary and others in the department and staff, IT staff, for achieving that. One other proposal that we've been working on the last couple of weeks that Marty first drafted, and that I've been also working on, has to do with creating a standing select board committee of civilians tasked with examining on an ongoing basis policing issues and the civilian complaints process. Basically, the select board is involved in the civilian complaints process in several ways, and from our review of previous reports and from talking to complainants, we think that that role could be benefited by having this standing committee of civilians, and also that when this committee ends and the task force ends, it would be good to have a group of civilians on an ongoing basis reviewing policing issues. That's still ongoing. It's something we're working on, but I just wanted to mention it. And then finally, we've been working on, and Ron has been spearheading this and been the primary person working on it, a feedback form, a web form wherein civilians could review their interactions with police. By review, I mean provide feedback on their interactions with police. And Ron, at our last meeting of the full committee, showed you that instrument, but we have also sort of created some recommendations for sort of unveiling or introducing this proposal, at least as a pilot for now, and then with some initial steps, not initial steps, some ideas, well, with initial steps as well as ideas for further implementation and elaboration of it. It's the last page of the packet, I believe.
Page 174.
Yeah. So Bernard, well, Ron, I'm not sure if you want to say something about this, and then I don't actually know if this we need to approve this and like send it to the select board as a committee or how that works. But
okay,
first,
I just want to say that the context in which the first I want to say the feedback form is for individual encounters with police officers, and links to the form we envision as being available on various social media as well as on the police website. And to just kind of summarize again, it can be filled out in as short a time as about a minute on a smartphone, or people can take as much time as they want to put in as much detail as they like. But the context that we want to wrap around the deploying or deploying the form as a pilot, I think it includes some important things. Number one, we would have the data for the form would be collected on the town website, as opposed to being, you might say, controlled by the police department itself. It's from the town IT department, but police personnel would be tasked with reviewing the data on a regular basis and responding to information, which will be both, it'll be both positive and negative feedback. It's just general feedback, like any kind of customer response survey, how we're doing, kind of a thing. So you'll get a range of we expect to get a range of responses. Number two, at the end of the form are links to the formal complaint and commendation process, which requires a lot more detail on the police site. So that's always going to be there. So that's true. Also, we are strongly recommending that a non-police body, in addition to the police body, have access to the data. In this particular case, in our proposal, we suggest Lloyd Gillino, the town's chief diversity officer, be given the option to independently review and analyze the data. Also, we're saying that both this committee, the Police Reform Committee, and the Reimagining Task Force, as long as they are in existence, have access to the data as it comes in to review. And we see this as basically a pilot program. We think that it can be expanded in a few different ways going forward. And on our proposal, I'd like everybody to take a look at it. Ideally, I would like to be able kind of to vote that we adopt this as a recommendation to the select board for how to deploy this web form that for civilians to give feedback to their interactions with the police.
Okay, so what is the vote?
Yeah, so just vote that the recommendations that we've made, which appear on page 174 of the packet, that we make this the context for with which we will propose that the web form be deployed. So it's this kind of set of sort of rules and context for how we deploy the form.
Okay. I guess I don't understand.
Okay, so basically
we're voting on what?
The recommendations that are described on page 174 of the packet.
So why don't you summarize those?
Okay, so I'll just kind of read it. One, immediate steps for piloting the form. One, add a link to the survey on the police department webpage and about feedback on police encounters. Provide a link to the police department's social media pages like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, for people to be able to access the form. 3, have staff from the police department regularly monitor responses to the feedback form and analyze responses for patterns indicating possible reform actions and publish relevant summary statistics in the department mid-year and end-year reports. 4, the Committee for Policing Reforms and the Reimagining Task Force, while they exist, will have access to the data. For the duration of the Committee for Policing Reform, Ron Wilkinson will act as the point person, periodically reviewing and evaluating form activity and recommending tweaks as needed. 5, Lloyd Delano, the town's Chief Diversity Officer, shall be given the option to independently review and analyze the data as time and staff interest permits. So those are immediate steps. Then ideas for the future. As feasible, add a QR code to the business cards of police employees, which links to the survey. 2, the police department may consider.
Those, I don't think those have to be presented to the select board.
Because, yeah.
Well, other than as, and we don't have to vote on that.
Okay, so.
I mean, unless you want to, I mean.
That you'll consider them as ideas for the future. that's
Yeah.
the vote, I guess.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so
You
consider
wanna-
this as ideas for-
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, but still, we want the accountability subcommittee wants the endorsement of the full reform committee to give these recommendations to the select board for how we deploy this form. That's it.
Okay, good. Any discussion of that?
Sorry, this is Devin. I just wanted to jump in quickly because IT had brought to my attention that the survey would require a premium Survey Monkey account. And that is an annual cost of $1,200. And so that's just something, that monetary value would need to come from the money that this committee has as from town meeting. So that is definitely a vote that would need to be taken.
Okay. So I'd like to suggest that, you know, the cost of that, Devin, come out of our committee's budget for the first year, and then hopefully it will be seen as valuable enough to be absorbed by police department budget or you know, other budget.
Or IT. I mean, this surely is not solely, the Survey Monkey account is surely not solely used by the police department, right? This must
No,
be.
that's right. In fact, it's not even the police department's Survey Monkey account. It's a town's Survey Monkey account.
Right.
By the IT department of the town, and right now it's a very, very, very minimal account, because in fact it's intended to be a personal account rather than a business account, the particular plan that they're on, and the reason for the increased cost is because we would have several people being able to access the data, either to review the data or to be able to tweak the form, and so that requires essentially a minimal business level account. Instead of being $75 a year, which is basically a personal account, it becomes $1,200 a year for a minimal business account, which would be used for other purposes besides just this particular form. I mean, it will be a benefit for the town altogether to have a true business account in SurveyMonkey.
Casey?
Ron, who would be, you said, to be able to edit and view? Who would be doing that?
Yeah, okay, so right now, the person who controls the town's account is Ben Vivante, who is the town's web designer. And so for this particular purpose, we wanted to add the ability administered by Ben to have myself be able to review the data, Lloyd Gono to be able to review the data, and a designated person in the police department be able to review the data, analyze the data. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Kind of above my technical level.
Quick question. Just a quick question.
Okay, quick question, Jonathan.
If there was Ron, in your provisions, I'm not sure if I heard it, but or your propositions, if there was in sort of an independent in the future, if there was like an independent like citizens review board of a sort, would they also have access of reviewing such data?
Absolutely, and that's one of our ideas for the future. That where I was cut off before we finished, but the last one, if and provision is if and when the subcommittee's proposed standing select board committee for policing issues is instituted, it shall present and analyze feedback at its well-publicized public hearing. That's the provision we put in there for that purpose.
Great.
And by the way, I don't think the subcommittee is talking about a citizens review panel. So I mean, you're talking about a. Well, what are we talking about, Marty?
Think of it. Well, it's not
committee
done yet, but you would think of it as almost weak civilian review in the sense that they would oversee the overseer. That the review would be done by the IAO, but there would be this group of civilians who could examine that and perhaps appeal those decisions to the select board. At least that's the idea that's contemplated.
Yeah, I think that I mentioned that because the idea of a civilian review panel, connotes a lot more, including investigatory powers and various authorities that what we're talking about would not include.
Well, we've had conversation about a citizens review, sort of committee of a sort a couple of times in our subcommittee, but maybe not here, but I think it's worth looking into nonetheless.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Elizabeth?
Okay, good.
Elizabeth, you're muted. Please unmute. Still muted.
There we go.
There you go.
There we go. I just want to thank you, Ron, and the Accountability Subcommittee on this, because I think that actually being able to have a way for the public to give their feedback about the police committee, the police work, and that we can use all the committee or that the police can use is really great. And what I like about it so much is that it's very upfront. It's very direct. You're being asked to say what your experience is with the police officer that you interacted with. And I would just contrast that with the survey that was sent out to the town that looked like it was sent from Tufts, and you didn't realize until you got to the very end of it that it was for the town, for the reimagining group. And I found that was really, I heard from people, and I found it myself very unsettling, because you didn't know what you were doing until you got to the end. So I love this is right up front. You're like, you are reviewing your interaction with the police. And I thought that was terrific for the public. So I just want to thank you for setting it up like that. And people are familiar with using these kind of rating things. And it gives people a chance to say good things and critical things. So it really is an opportunity for us to be honest with each other in the community.
Okay, Casey?
And so Ron, also thank you. I don't take objection to the form that we looked at in our last meeting. I feel like it's a bit premature to vote and institute now, just given that we haven't worked out so many of the particulars about what will happen, what we're going to recommend for civilian review or where it will end up. I just feel a little uneasy about kind of what
the civilian review thing is not
for.
It's not part of this. I think we should be clear about this. Like here, we're just hoping to vote on this form being placed on a website, and that the police department will include info about it in the year-end reports, and that if Lloyd's office is willing and able, they can also look at this data. That's pretty much what, I don't want us to be thinking that this is some grand change to anything. This is really about implementing a form for people to review their encounters to the police department, and we can have those broader conversations some other time. Does that make?
I mean, it is a bit of a, I mean, for people that would be impacted by it, it is more than just a form that'll be nice to look at. And, we talked about both the surveys that were released by the two committees that we needed to build in controls around those to make sure that, it didn't get, taken and manipulated by people with ill intention on either side. Right. And so I guess I just am a little bit leery about that people without controls built in, doing something.
Okay, so I suppose you're concerned about people just sort of kind of gaming their responses in some way or other. I mean,
Yeah.
that's true with any kind of customer feedback survey, which doesn't mean it isn't a concern. It is a concern, but yeah, I would be expecting in the process of analyzing the data to see a lot of different kinds of responses, and quite frankly, including some people purposely trying to kind of game it in the beginning, but. To me, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It just means we should be aware that those kinds of things can happen. That's pretty much what I would say about it now. We could. I'm happy to talk with you. Whenever about thoughts I have about about setting sort of ground rules for the review. But anyway.
I mean, and it goes both ways. I'm not saying someone's going to game it, specifically against me because they don't like me, and there's going to be some big campaign to go on and do a bunch of write-ins about an experience with me. It could go the other way, right? So I think like it's not just, I mean, a Yelp review, right? There could be consequences, and so I just want to be mindful of that, right? So we're looking at what's coming across with the Criminal Justice Police Reform Act, and how complaints and things that are determined to have been wrongdoings by police officers will be held against them. And I do have concerns around, as you coined it, the gaming of that system. I feel like there needs to be a little bit more built into it. And again, I don't take objection to the form, and I think that we could get some really great feedback from it. It's just I have some reservations to that extent.
Yeah, I think that's an important point because it's an important point.
Yeah, I think Casey does bring up a very important point. Just to echo that, I think you mentioned, Casey, that it's good for either side, because you don't want it to be tempered in any way, like somebody just gaming it, or a police officer getting that and kind of, I don't know, in some way manipulating what they're getting and changing their who knows what could happen. So I think, like you said, Casey, it is important to really put perimeters in place so that we can understand how this is going to be deployed and what are sort of some perimeters that is going to keep this afloat, is a sustainable tool for longevity.
Okay, so how would you like to work on that?
Why don't you take that back to the subcommittee and sort of come up with some ways to address. I see it two things. Number one, the people filing complaints, for example, that
But this is not a complaint form.
Well, I mean, it's a form that gives an opportunity to state what happened in an incident.
Right,
So,
but it's not a formal complaint form.
Right. No, okay, so it's not a complaint form, but I guess the issue is, making sure that we review the information, in a way that's not naive, I guess, and also making sure that it's not gamed by, a sort of organized complaint, organized thing of people filing complaints.
So I'm just sorry, but I'm just trying to understand what exactly the concern is. Because if the concern is that like 60 civilians are going to pick a particular officer and write their officer's name in and say they did something really bad, I have a lot of trouble believing that that's something people would do with no basis at all. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if like one person has a bad encounter with an officer and writes some crap in a form. I mean, if you go on Yelp or not Yelp, if you go on the Google reviews for the police department, people already do stuff like that. I don't know why, but some people fill out Google reviews and say like, this parking officer gave me this ticket and I'm so mad. And I mean, like, I get it. Like, I get that, people are probably there are going to be people who are going to write negative things, but I don't really, from my perspective, I don't really see what the sort of potential danger is, because it's not like this is something that people are going to get disciplined for. This is just a review form. If they want to file a complaint, that's a different process, and that, you know, there's a lot of procedures in place to make sure that people aren't disciplined unfairly.
But Michael, if we're using this data to then be presented in a public forum about what the public thinks about us, and there's been some, you know, I mean, we had a subcommittee meeting for the task force that was Zoom bomb, right? It was a total disaster. Everything was offensive. There are people that are just out there looking to disrupt, right? Like, we can't deny that happens. And I just think that there needs to be controls around information, that if we're going to, you know, have a civilian review board or have a committee that's looking at it and then releasing it publicly, that one, we're not naive about it, and that there are controls around how that data is used. Because, I mean, everything that we're doing right now is under incredible scrutiny in the police department. So we can't pretend that this one piece of data would not be used to assess what the police department is doing.
Yeah. Well, again, I want to reiterate, there's no proposal for a civilian complaint board in this particular proposal. So that's another discussion, but.
Well, it's going to be reviewed by a civilian in this committee and then presented. Yeah. So that's essentially civilian review right there, without it being like that
has a particular meaning, right? Civilian review is not whether or not someone got 3 stars for a traffic stop. Yeah.
I'm saying we're having a civilian from this committee would review the data and then be presenting it publicly, you know, to a public forum, which becomes a public record. I just think that it's important to consider.
Okay, so Casey, so I'm happy to talk with you about specific ideas for controls. Okay, and I'll probably also talk with other people about who actually have expertise in these kinds of things, and in other contexts about what kinds of limits or ways they have of dealing with this sort of thing. Because anytime you put out a form like this, these kinds of issues can come up. So I'm happy to talk with you about that. But I do think it's very, very important that we do put out something like this, give people an opportunity to provide feedback. And we just have to kind of deal with the fact that in the real world, there are also bad players. But, you know, that's just bad actors, I guess, is the term.
And in our review of any responses, we should be clear-headed also, that, you know, not every time someone says, you know, a cop was rude, that you know, that is necessarily the you know, gospel truth.
Well, yeah, okay, but the point is, the reason for having a form like this is that, for the most part, the general public, it's not an even playing field right now. You know, what we've got is a situation in which we've got the official police records, and we don't have that much information from the general public. And I think it's very important. I think it becomes more balanced by having more information from the general public. I mean, customer service in many industries has gotten a lot better since these kinds of forms have gone in. You know, it's been remarkable what kinds of changes that we've seen over time, and I would say in the past 25 years, since these kinds of things have come in. Various institutions have become a lot more responsive because people are able to give feedback. Lots of people have been able to give feedback. And
I don't think, no one's doubting that. I mean, I think it's just a question of making sure that there are controls in place so that it's not misused, or it doesn't give us data that misdirects us. So.
Yeah, if I just, a quick thing here, I don't want to hold us back from, you know, in this conversation, from this vote or whatever we're doing, but you know, I don't think there's any naivete in putting this thing out. I think any sort of question of naivete would really question, you know, Ron's sort of, you know, ability, or I don't think anybody's doing that intentionally, but I think, you know, Ron put a lot of thought into putting this whole thing together. He constructed it built on like feedback from all of us in a subcommittee, you know, and so it is, you know, it is worth considering that.
No one doubts that. Let's move on. No one doubts that. Let's move on.
I'm sorry, you're just gonna cut me off and okay, that's fine. We can move on. That's okay.
This along.
That's okay. I mean, that is. I mean, come on.
You're rambling, Jonathan. come on. So I'm
Oh,
gonna, yes, I'm gonna cut you off. Let's move on.
What am I rambling about? I'm saying,
Get into that
there's
argument.
the word naivete was thrown out, or a couple of different times.
Jonathan, you're rambling again. Let's move on.
Pardon me. So are we going to make a formal recommendation at this time or not? What do we decided to do?
I think we should send it back to the subcommittee to sort of work on some of the issues that have come up.
Okay,
what do you think? I mean, is that okay with you?
Well, I saw that Elizabeth and Paul had their hands raised at different points, and maybe.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We'll hear those voices.
Paul?
I was going to vote in favor of this because everything would be confidential. But now I hear that it's going to be made public, what the results are. I too have some problems with that. So when I was a judge, we used to have judicial performance evaluations. Marty knows about that. Before I left, the judicial performance evaluations were sent out to people, to litigants, to witnesses, to jurors, to anybody who had any interactions with the police. I mean, with the judge, particular judge. Just like what Ron is suggesting, to get feedback on what the judge's performance was. And it came back that, and these were anonymous surveys, it came back that there were more negative remarks about judges of color than white judges. And these evaluations were suspended. I don't know if it's still ongoing now, Marty. I've left the bench. But periodically, I've gotten reviewed. So I know what they're talking about. So there are some consequences if it were made public. The judicial performance evaluations were not made public, so that was good. But if we're going to make all these data public, I would be concerned also.
Okay, so actually, in one of the subcommittee meetings, I think in a packet, I actually listed a very long list of considerations that could come up regarding to what degree, including to what degree the results should be made public. For example, we could just make, say, some summary statistics public, or we can make more details public, and it would depend on it isn't all or nothing. I guess I put it that way. We should have guidelines about that. So what I find interesting so that's number one. We'll leave that there, and I'm happy to talk more about these kinds of things. The impression I got, by the way, at that particular subcommittee meeting is that people felt that was getting too much into the gory detail, and not everybody wanted to hear it. But now that we're getting close to it, now people are getting interested, which I think is a good thing.
My impression was not that we ever thought individual responses would be public. It was that the summary statistics would be public.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, and that's good, but I have a feeling that one of the concerns, and correct me if I'm wrong, Casey, you were concerned about responses about individual officers becoming public, and that is one of your concerns. Is that correct?
I think it's that, and also what Michael just said, even the summary data. I think this, and like I said, Ron, I liked the form. I see a lot of value in it. I'm not sure I feel comfortable and ready that it's to put it to a vote. I feel like there's still some questions. It was news to me this evening that this was going to be public. I may have missed that in the notes or your prior presentation. I have concerns about it.
Okay, so actually in my prior presentation, I didn't say specifically say one way or the other whether the results would be public. I simply said this is a way of getting feedback, and we put other parameters around that. What I found interesting, by the way, I just want to comment on what you said, Paul. Yeah, it is very interesting what you said, that for the judicial feedback form that judges of color got many more negative comments. To me, I still find that to me that reveals structural racism or implicit racism in the judicial system, which is not what people were looking for, but still it's what came out because those things were there. And I think that's I could still consider that to be a very important result. However, the particular way in which one interprets the results is very, very important, and different people will interpret it and will interpret the results in different ways. So we could make, especially since this is just a pilot, we could decide that we put this in place. We don't necessarily we don't have to commit in the beginning for the pilot to making the results available to the full public. We could simply say that for the pilot, we would make it available for example, the Reform Committee and the Reimagining Task Force to evaluate, and I think the Diversity Committee and the police, and kind of discuss and kind of based on the results, we would have a specific time frame. We would put it out after say a month or two of putting it out there. Let's see what we got and what it means, and we could decide from there what to do next. That's an idea.
Okay, so you're going to take it back to the subcommittee or work with Casey and whoever else to sort of come up with some final proposal, all right?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
I just want to again focus on one word in the proposal. It's the word data, and I think that needs some clarification what that means.
Well, it's pretty much whatever is collected on the form is data.
Well, but that gets into what gets public is the name of the individual. If an officer is named, is that data?
Well, it's data. Yeah. So it's a matter of what data is publicized. Right. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying needs to be worked on.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. I'm fine with that. By the way, I would also like to say is that in addition to members of the Reform Committee or Accountability Committee meeting, I would love, and I think Raul at least was on the call. He's not right now. I would love to have at least one person from the Reimagining Task Force also work with us on this. I think it's important to both of our missions for that to be there. And I do want them to have access to the data too. So I want them to have input, some representative from there to have input into how we decide this.
Okay, well, why don't you work out the details with whoever. So,
okay.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. I mean, that's very important, but you need to work out the details. So next, militarization. I'm sorry, civil rights, militarization, and mass events. Mr. Yee. I think you're muted.
I apologize.
We all do it, Paul.
Sorry. So we had two meetings in December with respect to racial profiling. We've had extensive discussions, and a lot of that discussion revolved about benchmarks, and that we don't have an accurate benchmark. And it's made very clear from the presentation provided by the Reimagine Policing Task Force on the citations and the traffic stops. That was very good. There were two sessions by the Reimagine Policing Task Force that Dan spoke at about the citations. There was another session that the transportation director spoke about what the traffic was in Brookline, and basically the data brought out by I'm not going to go over what they presented, but I think what's significant for us is that the data presented by the Reimagining Policing Task Force was that most of the people who were ticketed are non-residents. and it continued to current time. They had January to September 2020 statistics. So 80% of the tickets provided, traffic stops, not tickets, traffic stops were non-residents. About 14%, only 14% were residents. And then when the transportation director spoke, he talked about the 4 entry or gateway points, since Brookline is surrounded by Boston and other neighboring cities and towns. So all types of different traffic comes in. So the reason the benchmark is important, we don't know exactly what is the driving population in Brookline to compare to what this percentage of stops of a certain racial group are, like Blacks. If that percentage, right, is within the norm or is it out of whack? And that would be some indication of racial profiling. It was good that Marty was able to attend our last meeting. He brought up the fact about the windshield observational study from 2008. Dan has contacted those people at Northeastern. The estimate of costs for a new study, updated study, excuse me, was $30,000 to $40,000. I think most of the committee members were supportive of updating that study so that we would have an accurate benchmark on what the driver population of Brookline at any point in time. We also talked about what's ongoing at this time by the police department, what measures have been done to monitor traffic stops by the individual patrol officers. There is a program called Fair and Impartial Policing, FAIP. Perhaps either Dan or Casey could give a presentation of that, just to let people know that there is supervision in the field on police officers when they're out on patrol for traffic stops.
Okay, thank you. By the way, I think I'd like to add that one of the things that looking at the traffic patterns on is actually 9 roads that Todd Corain presented to the task force, as well as looking at the difficulties in the benchmark study, or I'm sorry, the windshield study, and other difficulties. It may be that we conclude that it's just not possible to find a benchmark that's really reliable. Maybe we can find a benchmark that's close to being reliable, but it may be that we can't find one that's really close enough. And the conclusion of our committee may be that the issue is not whether there's scientifically determined racial profiling, but rather assuming that it exists at some level. What do we do about it? What has the Brookline Police Department been doing about it? And are there any suggestions that we have to make it more effective?
Bernard?
I think Marty and then Casey.
Yeah, 2 questions. Well, one is a question. I remember hearing about the fair and impartial policing. And to Chief O'Leary, have we gotten a description of that program yet? Have I just been so flooded with stuff I didn't notice it? Did you send that to us?
I don't think I did.
Okay, so that answers one question, if you could send that out. But more importantly, I disagree with what Bernard just said, that we can't get what's called a DPE, driver population estimate study. I think we should just try to move on the Northeastern racial justice program through Jack McDevitt to get a driver population estimate study. I've talked about this before. I mean, it just seems to me that it would elucidate the conversations that we're having and the task force is having. I thought what Todd presented last week was a crude substitute. I commend him for doing it, but it's just not the same as a scientific study. And it seems to me that this is the time to do that. We had it done through Chief O'Leary's initiative, 2008 and 9, and we were one of only 8 communities that did that. And if we have both of these committees going on now, this is the time to do that again.
Okay.
And
No,
I'd like to make a motion that we urge that that be done.
no, actually, we're not ready for that. But no, no, I'm not saying that we shouldn't come up with some benchmark, but like you said, it's an estimate. As long as we understand it's an estimate.
That's what it's called technically. It's an estimate, but that's the only thing you can get.
Yeah,
That
right.
is the technical term for the best thing possible,
Okay.
is a DPE study.
Okay.
And,
Bernard, why do you think we're not ready for that?
Ready for?
Well, you know,
for-
Marty made a kind of a proposal, and you said, "Well, we're not ready for that." But why are we not ready for that?
Well, are we ready to make a proposal to do a $30,000 to $40,000 study, a windshield study?
Well, it's a proposal. It doesn't have to be necessarily have to be a windshield study per se. but
whatever
a
they
study. Yeah.
determine. I mean, that is basically what it's called. They put people out, usually students, at various intersections, and determine by a subjective visual methodology.
Before we ask the select board to spend $30,000 to $40,000 on a survey, we have to be a little more, or provide a little more detail as to what we expect to get out of it, what we expect to get out of it.
All right, so can Chief
I also
O'Leary
make
get from Jack McDevitt
slightly
a
annoying?
summary, a proposal?
I'll be honest with you. I don't know what the bidding laws are at that amount of money. Whether it has to go out to bid. And the other thing I'm a little concerned about is we're in the middle of COVID.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
It's really not I think our traffic patterns are all messed up. I don't think we'll get an accurate count, unfortunately, until it clears up and we're back to normal. That's my 2 concerns that I have. I'd have to check those, well, at least the first one out.
I'd also like to just confirm before we undertake the study that we can do some type of study that happens at night, because Todd did provide, some great information the other day, but he determined in his analysis, determined the driver population based on the morning commute. I was watching the task force meeting, and I know that during the morning commute, the vast majority of our patrol division is tied up doing morning traffic posts and not doing traffic enforcement. It's just the reality that we assist every school at various locations, in that morning time period. And so during the 2 hours, let's say from 7 to 9 a.m., that only accounts for 7% for at least 2019, and it was even less in 18. It accounted for 7% of our motor vehicles traffic citations that were issued. And looking at that data, there was 14%, the largest volume of traffic citations were issued in the 1 hour period between midnight and 1 a.m. And so I just think it's very important, if we're going to use these studies to determine the driver population, that the driver population we're studying mirrors those times at which we're actually doing the traffic enforcement. And it's not a perfect system. It's a lot of data. We do anywhere from like 10 to 30,000 moving violations a year. It's a lot to look at, and we have countless cars coming through. But I would like to, stipulate, if we do spend that money, the importance of actually looking at the driver population in the evening, because that's what we do.
They do that. They will do that.
They did not in the last study, Marty. They didn't. They said they were unable to.
The windshield thing was what they did in 2008 and 9 was different.
Okay, so that's another thing we need to clear up. And also, night studies are based, as I understand, on intersections that have good lighting. So we have to identify what those intersections are and whether they're relevant to our studies. But so I think we need to work on that proposal. Why don't you pursue that, Marty?
Well, I'd like to get something from Jack so we can talk about it.
Okay.
I mean, they're in the middle of exams now, and
Yeah.
Jack could be asked that question about how COVID affects it.
Yeah.
It's pretty, I mean, I would agree with the COVID point that traffic patterns are really messed up right now. Now is not the time to try to think of generalizable driving patterns. But it may take us sufficiently long to actually execute that there's no harm in planning now in anticipation of executing at some point in the future. That's,
So so that's, you know, what you should prepare for the select board's consideration. And yeah, my thinking is that for that reason, as well as I think, you know, anything we get is not going to be that reliable. You know, we need to make sure we emphasize, you know, the things that the department does currently, and maybe some recommendations for what they should do to reduce the amount of profiling, irrespective of, you know, what the actual numbers are. Okay, what's the next committee? Community outreach. Who's that? That's Casey?
Can we have Dan or Casey speak about the fair and impartial policing?
Oh, okay, yeah.
What steps the police department is taking to minimize racial bias in traffic stops?
Yeah, can someone talk on that?
Sure, I'll give it a try. I think it was clear that over the years, we've done an awful lot of training on issues that would help an officer deal with his or her unconscious or unconscious biases, and make sure that they try to understand where those biases come from, that they're not the only ones that have them, but they just can't let that affect their decision making. So we have done a lot of training on that, going back from the, I'd say, to around 2000 when it first began. We also distribute every month within the department the stats as to the tickets that are issued, who issues them. It is a breakdown of the race and sex of the tickets that are issued. We don't have a real good idea of what benchmark to use, but we do break it down by platoons. So by platoons, you get a day shift, first shift, last half, and those platoons end up, we break down the tickets that are issued on each platoon. And there's an arbitrary number that's picked that we take a look at and make sure that the officers are not overly exceeding that number. If we see someone that may be out of whack in 1 month, we ask the sergeant to talk to them about it, bring it to their attention to make sure that it gets corrected. So it's a well-rounded program. It goes from looking at the department's overall stats right down to the individual stats. And there's a lot of effort to put in to make sure that we can reduce any wrong type of policing that can occur. It does occur in some places, including here. But I think the way we keep an eye on it, the way we deal with it, and we're up front with it, is a good way to work. And almost in every time that we've had a conversation with an officer, that officer has corrected behavior that we were concerned about.
So, fair and impartial policing, is that a program, or is that just how you describe the process that you go through?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, it's all that we do. We put it under the umbrella of fair and impartial policing.
I'm sorry, you put it where?
We put it on the umbrella of fair and impartial policing. Casey, do you want to add anything?
Okay, so there's nothing written about this process.
I would have to check. I'm
Okay.
sure there are directives and things, whether there's a policy.
Okay.
I'm drawing a blank right now.
I believe Casey was going to prepare a write-up of a related matter, and that is the supervision process. You're working on that, right?
I'm working on it.
Okay, no, we're all busy. Don't worry. I'm not the one to complain about someone, in that regard. Okay, and anything else on this?
I have a quick question. If there's something in writing, it seems to me, am I missing something? Why would it not be in the police manual? Strikes me that this kind of thing should be somehow, it probably needs to be edited in some fashion, but it should be part of the general policies that are transparent to the public. Think about that. That's a rhetorical question for now.
Yeah,
I think it's in the annual report. That's why I found it.
That a description of that program?
Yes, yeah.
Well, so actually that kind of underlines my point. I do think the manual ought to have it if it's already been published.
Yeah.
It basically seems like a policy to me.
Yeah, I mean, there are provisions in the manual that are elements of this.
Right.
Duties of sergeants, requirements to write up reports. I mean, that all of that's in the manual. But yeah, I agree that maybe we need something that's more that gives people a sense of how supervision occurs, to give them some assurance that we're monitoring things and correcting things. So
it's a good thing, and I did not even know about it. I've been involved with this stuff for 3.5 decades.
I think it's important to stress too, part of the program, a lot of it is built around the type of training that we give the officers. I talked just about implicit bias training, but our training goes way beyond that, where we talk about how we expect things to happen during a traffic stop, how we want an officer to approach a vehicle, how you should engage somebody in conversation and make sure they know exactly why you're doing it and what the outcome could be. All things like that we want to lessen the negativity of a stop and make it as comfortable and educational and solve what the inappropriate driving habit was. And you just can't look at it as supervision. I think it covers the whole gamut over the whole racial profiling issue.
Just one thing I want to acknowledge is that I believe this was one of Chief O'Leary's sort of projects. I remember telling me that you kind of sought after support from a professor friend at Northeastern to implement this. So I just want to acknowledge that really, obviously has put the department in a way where these things can be monitored. So it's a really good thing. I think definitely looking at it in relation to kind of what we need now to implement moving forward is definitely a good thing, to review and take a look at it. But yeah, I think that's a great thing.
So Dan, the training you're talking about, how to approach a car, how to engage with the driver, et cetera. Would that be in the curriculum, a curriculum that you used in training?
Yeah, part of it was that training that you attended up at Pine Manor.
Yeah.
Talk about police legitimacy and procedural justice and things like that. That was all part of it.
Is there a written curriculum or is it just the video?
We designed that curriculum with people in our department. Designed that curriculum with Cambridge Police, and we do have there is a copy of the curriculum as well, because we've shared it with other, like the ADL we shared it with, and we shared it with other departments.
So we should, could you get us a copy of that? Because that, I don't think that should be in a policy, because I'm sure that changes over time. But I think it's important for people to know what goes into it.
So some of those steps that we talked about, especially the ones during traffic stops, are in the policy.
Right.
They are in the manual.
It's in the traffic enforcement part. And we had discussed about also providing police officer discretion at traffic stops. And so in response to Marty's question, whether or not there was a directive inside the manual about use of discretion, that is in the manual.
Right, okay.
One last thing, Bernard, is that I don't know. We have discussed whether Ron could work with Paul on the data. And one thing I'm curious about, I did bring up at Paul's.
Okay, someone needs to mute their phone, their TV.
So I brought up at Paul's subcommittee Monday, the question of breaking down some of the data, especially for some of the more discretionary and least dangerous motor vehicle stops. Things like a rolling stop sign, lane violation, equipment violation. I'd be particularly interested to see if they have different racial breakdowns than things like speeding, for instance. Anyway, that's it.
Okay, good. Let's move on to the, what's the next one? Community outreach youth. Community outreach.
Community outreach, youth, and non-traditional roles. We actually had a meeting just today, and we tackled a discussion around homelessness in Brookline, and Lieutenant Pastor and Officer Joe Amdola and myself gave an overview of what the extent of homelessness in Brookline as we see it, the expectations and requests that come into us from the community, and dealing with and addressing homelessness as a nuisance, as an eyesore, as a public health and safety concern, and then also how we provide some direct service to homeless in our community that we have longstanding relationships with, and newer homeless that have emerged kind of particularly during COVID. So we had discussed at our first committee meeting that there is no town entity that has a person designated to address homelessness in Brookline. Both Officer Amendola and myself and Lieutenant Pastor as well have done outreach to various service providers and organizations within town to see who can assist homeless that we were having issues with. They're very complicated issues often. We're not just talking about people that come, into a hard way and are looking for shelter. We can often help those folks because Brookline, the state is a right to be housed state. I'm not sure if that's the proper term. And they will house folks through the Department of Transitional Assistance. But for those people who don't want to have housing, how we address that and how we support those needs, their needs, as well as the concerns of the community. And so, it's a complicated discussion. And we used one recent case study of a gentleman who's been homeless in our community for many years, whose problem has exacerbated over the last several months, resulting in something to the extent of like 86 calls or 85 calls to the police department since August. And really over the last month, a significant increase in what was seen as needs that he had and concerns from the community. And, in looking at, I'm sorry, thank you, Janice. Yeah, our right to shelter state. Massachusetts is a right to shelter state. And so we talked a little bit about that. We talked about, we've reached out since our first committee meeting I reached out to the health department. I reached out to Brookline Community Mental Health, the Department of Public Works, and we'll be getting representatives from those organizations, Brookline Housing, to establish a task force to look at homelessness and have it not just be a response by the police. It's not, being homeless isn't a crime. We don't want to criminalize that behavior. We do have demands from the community to address what appears often to be health and safety and sanitation concerns, trespassing, when homeless folks don't have, a place to relieve themselves or to put trash, those become issues that come to our attention. But any enforcement around those really is a short-term Band-Aid. We want to provide services and do long-term problem solving for people that are in need, that are on the street, and even if they want to be there, make sure that they're being supported and try to mitigate that. And so we're very optimistic about what the task force may be able to bring together and see how we can have it similar to what is our hoarding task force, which is a multi-agency response, and it seems to work very well. And so we had a lengthy discussion today. It was, I think, enlightening for folks on the call to hear kind of what some of the struggles are in the community, and the nuances and dealing with that. So we have some ideas that came out of our talking group. Michael sent me a link to the Portaloo, which would be public restrooms, and just dealing, with trying to see how we can support people in Brookline. We don't have a huge homeless population. We are seeing an increase, and certainly it's not a low number of calls that we receive, particularly most recently with a gentleman whose situation has become much more of a nuisance to the community, and we have a lot of concerns around him. And Joe Amendola, our homeless liaison, was, he talked about his relationship with this gentleman. They've developed quite a friendship, and he brought him dinner at Thanksgiving, and he tries to negotiate with him to not, put his stuff all over the sidewalk and cause some, cause community concerns, and negotiate kind of with him on that. And they have a pretty nice friendship that they've developed. And so we have some good tasks going forward on that. We also updated on the survey, and I know Caitlin is on listening as well. That has all been sent out. They're starting to come back. Caitlin has agreed to and has already set up the Google Analytics for us, and we'll be collecting the surveys as they're coming in, and we'll be doing the data entry for us, and we'll also be scanning all of the results that come in into a PDF form so that they're accessible to everybody as well. So we'll get some aggregated data, and hopefully after the new year, we can start looking at some of that data. We'll give it a couple more weeks to come in, and then hopefully we'll see some good feedback that we can use to look at how our Walk and Talk program is delivering services to our Brookline Housing Authority residents.
So when will that be available?
So I'm thinking we'll collect the surveys probably through the first week of January. And then depending on how quickly Caitlin can get items, get the survey responses input and analyzed, we'll be seeing those results.
Yeah, I would say I've been putting them in as I get them. Sorry, I have a crying baby, so I'm going to talk fast. But I would say if we wait until maybe the first week of January to get all of the surveys, I can probably have it done by mid-January. If that's okay with everybody.
Well, that's great.
Great. Caitlin, thank you so much for offering, volunteering to take that on. It's very much appreciated. And I like that it's, you're getting the results. You're gonna, have the copies of those available to everybody. And so it seems like a very transparent process in that respect. So
very happy to do it.
Yeah, I'd love to look at the, thank you so much for doing this. Like, it's the data entry, especially, I'm sure is just like brutal work. So you're doing us such a favor, and we really appreciate it. But I really love to see the raw responses, like this, whatever spreadsheet comes out, just to make some plots and stuff, because that's sort of my day job in a way. So I'm just curious to look at the responses, and I'm sure, obviously you're going to do that too, but
yeah, I can, I'll, like Casey said, I'll scan all of the hard copies in so people can see the actual surveys themselves and the answers. Then there'll be the Excel spreadsheet with all the raw data. Google actually turns things into tables and graphs, so I'll send that to everybody as well, and we'll do a written report.
That's awesome.
That'll be easy to read.
Great.
Yeah.
And by the way, Casey, I assume this does not have the type of raise the type of concerns you had with respect to the online form. Because it's to a defined audience. And otherwise, okay.
Yeah, it's much more work to do a paper survey. I didn't realize town hall was actually out of envelopes. We had to get those printed. And so it was a very manual process in terms of stuffing and labeling. And, we had tremendous help from town hall print shop and mailroom. Paul and Morgan were very generous with assisting with that. And it went to each household. It also went to households that BHA identified as not having English as their first language. We translated the surveys and sent those additionally in their primary language. And so I think There's controls built in that it went just to the residents as opposed to just an open link online. And to me in particular for that, it's most important if we're going to evaluate the services that our residents in Brookline housing are receiving. I want the residents to be the ones that are opining on that and not have other people weighing in with opinions. You know, it's very important for me that we hear from the residents.
Right. Good. Okay. The last one is the mental health and alcohol and drug abuse subcommittee is set up. Elizabeth, do you have anything to report on that?
We've gotten ourselves organized. Our first meeting is on Monday, the 21st at 9 a.m. Casey is on our committee along with Bernard, and Michael's going to come as many as he can. We have expert contributors from June Binney and Richard Chiola and Jen Pastor. Our first committee meeting will focus on defining the scope of the problem in terms of the numbers were involved. It's also going to be a summary of the existing diversionary efforts of the police department to take individuals who are present with clear mental health and substance abuse issues and how we utilize current crisis center programs as diversions among other diversionary options. And so Jen or her designee are going to continue to be an expert contributor on our committee. And I also had done some research about estimating the cost of running a crisis center, and it's pretty high for even the most basic crisis centers. So there are some clear limitations here around how you would manage the cost of such a thing. So we have to figure that out, and then the next step will be to figure out at what level does the crisis need to occur and what's best for Brookline. Is it better for us to be connected to the county, or is it better for us to remain connected as we are now to the Boston Emergency Services team, which has crisis center drop-offs in JP and downtown Boston. So we have a couple options here that we need to explore that might give us some short-term quick solutions while we could participate in a longer-term discussion.
Okay, could you describe to the committee, what it is we're talking about? What is a crisis center? And
sure.
Yeah.
So a crisis center, a typical crisis center runs about 5 to 6 beds, and it has at a minimum a full-time RN and a full-time counselor for those 6 beds. It's able to do immediate detox, de-escalation, emergency treatment. It's also able to serve as a diversion so people don't end up in an ER or end up in a jail or end up in a hospital. And then after a period of evaluation in the crisis center, usually up to about 72 hours, that person is then triaged to where they belong. And if it's somebody who's ill, they go to the hospital. If it's somebody who is not ill, or they might go to a detox or a rehab center. If that would be, they'd be ill also, but ill in a different way, not with mental illness, but with addiction. And so the effort is there is a system of that set up in Massachusetts currently, attached to emergency services teams. And because Brookline is contiguous with Boston, it's actually part of the Boston Emergency Services Team system. And we do utilize, as the Brookline Police Department, we do utilize drop-offs at the Solomon Carter Fuller Center downtown for their crisis beds and in the JP Center. Also, the Boston Emergency Services team can come to Brookline to assist. So it's really a figuring out how to make those linkages work in the best way possible. So our goal is that no person who is presenting with things that are not criminal behavior, we don't want them to be criminalized. We want them to get the help they need. And so it's critical that we make sure those linkages are really strong. And our department is actually, our Brookline department is much more progressive and forward thinking in this way than a lot of departments around the country. I mean, they're actually a leader. They're a technical training site for helping officers know how to deal with people with mental health and substance abuse and de-escalation. But we can always improve. So that's our question is, do we need another center, and should it be, and if so, why? And we're trying to assess that. we do have data from our grant, and about 350 people a year present in Brookline with substance abuse and mental health issues that our police respond to. And I want to just back up with Casey, because I think your point about we would do a great service to the town about creating a homeless task force beyond helping the law enforcement, because we know that homelessness is not only about people not being able to afford housing, it's about mental illness, addiction, sexual offender registry problems with getting housing, kids discharged from DCF custody who don't have housing. So we know there's so many multiple factors, and Brookline has not traditionally had a long history of a problem here, but as we've become more urban, that has become more of an issue for us. So it actually is a great town initiative, not just a law enforcement initiative.
So for purposes of this committee, I think it'd be good both in terms of the homelessness task force as well as your work, Elizabeth, to be able to articulate to the community why this starts off as a police issue.
Yes.
And how we, and to the extent to which we can reduce police involvement and get the involvement of other people.
Yeah.
I mean, like you probably wouldn't want to send a social worker, to some of these matters, but we need to explain why, and what ways in which we can reduce the police involvement. To the extent that's reasonable.
That's such a good point, Bernard. I was just talking to a colleague, who, like myself, who's practiced for more than 35 years, and we were saying we call the police when we know there's a situation that might have danger, that no person without real training in how to deal with very dangerous situations should be the first person in the door. But then what you want to do is you want to make sure that that handoff can happen immediately once you determine that it's safe for the clinicians to get involved. So I think the idea that the police have to be a part of the solution. We can't do this without them being a real part, because we as clinicians count on them. I mean, I can't tell you, even in Brookline, I have called the police more than once to say I have somebody that I am worried has a gun and we need intervention. And I don't know enough to know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
As a psychiatrist.
I assume as a clinician, you also have clients who, may be acting out or very upset, but not to the point of, danger, and you can involve, someone else, not a police.
That's right. And sometimes the police help us get those people to the right place, because when you as a clinician show up with a police officer, they know you mean business and you're going to get them the help you need. So it's not about criminal, it's about helping them.
But I guess the point I wanted to make also was that there's a lot of mental health calls, for example, that don't get into the policing system because they are currently dealt with by, I don't know, whoever, deals with them. But, a judgment is made by the clinician that that's possible. And the ones that get into the policing system are the ones that really are problematic, that scare the clinician.
That's right. Actually, that's very true. And I think that's one of the challenges we're having when I talk to Jen about pulling together the data, is so often the police are just responding and getting somebody to a hospital. So it's hard to actually get those numbers exactly right. So, and I know that the police have been criticized here and we're trying to reform and make improvements. So I know we can do it better. I get that. But I do want to say Brookline has been doing this for a long time and trying to do it really well. And so I think we also don't want to not recognize that work. There's a lot of work here, and that's why they have one of the 5 grants in the state. I mean, they're recognized as one of the top 5 communities in the state in this department. So there's always room for improvement, but we can build on what we've got.
Elizabeth, excuse me if I may. Elizabeth, I really liked what you said about, if there was an intervention, and while the police would respond, and immediately after that, there would need to be sort of a handoff,
yes.
With a clinician. Although it probably wouldn't be, you know, per Bernard's point, like a safe thing for a clinician like yourself to step in first.
Right.
But do you feel that in this provision, there's possibility for, say, I mean, hypothetically speaking, right, that there's a police officer who would respond alongside a clinician, where, you know, the police officer would be the first to intervene, but immediately thereafter, as soon as the situation is declared safe, then that is the sort of meeting point where then the clinician can slowly then step into and, you know, create the transition points.
You're exactly right about that, Jonathan. And we do have a social worker in the department now as part of their, because the department has this grant. And I think that might be one of the recommendations we might consider making, is that we actually expand that presence to go alongside the police officer. We might actually make that recommendation coming out. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that could come out of this subcommittee, that because we only have one. We only have one. And it's not, it doesn't cover, what does it cover? What does that cover? 40 hours a week, right?
Yeah.
So there might be some opportunity here to really help make things better for our police department.
Okay.
Learn more about that process. I might get in touch with you.
Okay.
Yes, do, please do. Marty, I want to sort of end the meeting because it's 7:16. We've been going a long time. I think it's been very helpful, but I'm getting hungry.
Very
Marty.
quickly on this, Boston has just adopted something on mental health calls by police. I'm sure, I see you nodding, so maybe you've looked at that. Isn't there some nationally touted program? Is it Seattle or San Francisco or someplace?
Texas? Are you talking about Texas, Marty?
I don't know. I just have a vague memory that some
Had one program. I think it's
Cahoots from
Houston,
Oregon.
Yeah, and Portland has what they have, the Cahoots program, right?
It's Eugene.
Maybe that.
Eugene. Okay.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming you folks are looking at that stuff. Is that?
Yes, and
okay.
Yes, I think that those are all good models. I think as we know, sometimes what works for a big city is not what will work for Brookline,
Right.
but it's those are models we can learn from. Yeah.
And a subcommittee of the task force is looking at that also. I mean, it's overlapping with our work, but I think that's appropriate because they're going to be looking at it from a different perspective, and that is from a different perspective. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap up this meeting. Let's see, I'm looking in the chat room, which I sometimes don't do. Oh, she says that Cahoots is funded within the police department of Eugene, which is interesting. Okay, any rate, okay, anything else? Our next meeting is, I think, the 30th, is it? Whatever 2 weeks from now is. And one thing I'd like people to think about is, what type of pre-meeting educational type event we want to have. If the subcommittee on accountability wants to try to get Ms. Lee to appear, that's one option. Or if other people have other ideas, let me know, and we'll try to set something up. Okay, and of course, all the subcommittees should be meeting between now and then, and beginning to pull together the sort of outline or the sort of initial iteration of the report that we're going to presenting to the select board. Let's see. Devin says, anything you want. Okay, let's see. Devin said, anything you want on a future agenda, please send to both me and Bernard. Okay, meaning Devin and me. Okay. Okay, let's end the meeting.
Good night.
Go have dinner. Bye now. Okay. Let's see.